We're here at Carillon Historical Park. It is May 5th, a little after 2 p.m. in the afternoon, and we're interviewing Charles Adams, who is 97 years old and has a lot to say about the history of Dayton. We are with Denny Dutcher, myself, a volunteer interpreter with Carillon Historical Park, Don and Patty Kersey, who Patty is related to Charles Adams, my wife Sharon Dutcher, and hopefully we will be joined by Daniel Schlegel in just a few minutes, lead interpreter at Carillon Historical Park. Charles, we understand that you have some great stories about the 1913 flood, so can you tell us how that went?
Well, I'd better start at the beginning. Easter Sunday, 1913. For 3 days it rained, and as much rain fell in those 3 days as goes over Niagara Falls in 30 days. So that's really the reason for the flood. The city had built levees. They thought they were building them high enough. It had been built to 15 feet, but as you will understand, it went another 15 feet before the day was over. So that's why all of, and the ground was wet, either wet or frozen. Some of it was wet, some frozen. So it would not absorb any of that water. So all that water went through all the little towns and down through Dayton and Hamilton. Dad told me that at that time, the city of Dayton had about 127,000 people.
Okay.
But that only the main streets were paved, the side streets were not paved. Our street, Rung Street, was not paved. Our street was named Rung Street because it was the name of the farmer who owned that property before it was subdivided. But from Main Street to Forest Avenue, it was Rung Street. From Rung Street west, it was Neal Avenue.
Okay.
It later was changed to Neal Avenue clear to Main Street.
And about how old were you at that time of the flood?
11 months.
11 months, okay.
Almost 12.
Okay.
Almost 1 year. Not quite.
All right, go ahead.
And Dad walked down to take a look at the river at that about 7 o'clock in the morning. And he was about ready to come over the levee at that time. But before he could get back home, it spilled over the levee and broke through and was coming down Rung Street. Dad took a picture of it coming down Rung Street. In fact, there was also a rescue boat already at work. They decided that there was no way of taking care of Lois and myself. There was water in the basement, water and no heat, didn't have time to get food out of the refrigerator even. So they decided they would go to my great uncle's place. He was my great uncle.
He lived nearby, or?
He lived on Warder Street, which
Okay.
is the next street north.
Okay.
But it was quite a bit higher, and they thought that it would be safe. But by 3 o'clock in that afternoon, the water was up to the porches already, and they decided they would have to take us further north. So Dad hailed a boat with Carl Sinks as a boatman, and we were all put in the boat over the railing of my great uncle's home. And as soon as Carl Sinks started to pull the boat away from the porch, the floodwaters caught it and slammed it against a tree and capsized the tree, and we were all dumped in the water. Mother, with her heavy coat on, was having trouble staying above the water, so she called to Dad that she was drowning. So my grandfather grabbed me, and Dad had Lois in his arms, but as he tried to help Mother, he lost Lois. So she started floating down the street all by herself.
So both of you were in the water?
Yeah.
Twins, I mean. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't. I was still in Mother's arms
Right.
until Dad took me out of the Mother's arms, and they floated down about 2 houses, caught the limbs of a smaller tree. And about that same time, another boat was coming down, so they stopped and picked up. Well, first, Dad tried to put Mother in this second boat. Only after they got Mother in the boat, she asked for me, and as she took me, that boat also capsized. So we were dumped in the water again. This time I went following Lois down the street, all by myself. Well, there were 7 different boats involved in our rescue. And when another one came by, they picked up my mother and took her to a rescue spot at the corner of Grand and Forest. We think it's the Presbyterian Church at that corner, which was high enough to be out of the water. But when the boatman picked up Lois, they stopped at a private home, and the lady of that house wanted to keep Lois because she thought Mother was drowning. But they finally talked her into letting them take Lois to a doctor at this corner of Forest and Grand.
Okay.
But another man by the name of E.L. Riley was just coming down the street when everybody called to him to get that baby out of the water. So he took an oar out of the boat, oar locks, and dipped it in the water and lifted me out of the water, put me in the laps of the 2 ladies on his back seat.
Amazing.
And they took me to the same place where Mother and Lois were.
Was there only like one rescue area that people would have been taken, or would it be possible that you all could have been separated?
It was possible we could have been, but we weren't, fortunately.
I see.
We all ended up at the same spot. Mother had a brother who was a pharmacist in Fostoria, Ohio, and using his profession, he was able to get through the guards at Dayton. And they decided that since there was no way of taking care of us either in our home or in Dr. Free's house, that he would take us to Fostoria, to my grandfather's house, which was he was a UB pastor in Fostoria. So that's where we were. In fact, when Mr. Eckert was here in Dayton writing his book, we weren't here, so he didn't get our story at all. But Mother worked for about 3 weeks with Dr. Wood in Fostoria to get us past this pneumonia. And fortunately, we were able to do so.
Yeah. And that was here in Dayton? No, you actually went up to Fostoria. Yes. Okay, right. I see.
We were there for a little over 3 weeks.
Right. So you were young enough that you don't remember any of this
No, this is
at
all
the
told
time?
me by first-hand observers.
Yes. Do you ever wish that you could remember it, or would that be too scary? Yeah.
No.
Well, that's quite a story. It looks like you had close to your 9 lives
Yeah.
used up. But wow, very fascinating tale. Charles, we also know that you had some experience, or you actually knew Charles Kettering or some
Yes.
family members. Tell us about Charles Kettering.
Well, Charles Kettering started this Dayton Engineering Laboratories Company, Delco. And my dad was his cashier.
Okay.
And he would walk down to Winder's Bank and carry the whole cash for the payroll back in this cloth sack back to the store, to the Delco.
Just walk on the street like a regular person?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you wouldn't do that today.
We have no idea how much money was in there at the time, right?
I'm purely guessing, but I would say they had 300 or 400 people in Delco at that time.
Oh, that would have been a sack of money, as they say. Yeah, right. And so you also knew Charles Kettering, though, right?
Yes.
And you had a story about when you came into his office one time and he got your attention?
Yeah. He called to me to come into his office. And as I walked in the door, something came flying at me, and it was a baseball bat.
A baseball bat.
But it was made out of balsa wood, and I fell flat over my face.
Trying to get out of the way of it, I assume.
No,
Yeah.
I was really trying to catch it.
Catch it, okay. Now, Charles Kettering, and how old were you when you started working for Charles and at that time?
Well, I wasn't working, but I was pretty young at that time.
Oh, okay, you were young. Okay, I follow you now. Yeah, okay.
I didn't work for Delco until after I got out of college.
So Charles Kettering must have had a fun-loving spirit for young people back then
Yeah.
to get your attention and play that little game with you. Yeah. So, what's your story about the unleaded gas as well? Tell us about that.
Well, Tom Midgley was one of the original barn gang.
And he also worked for Charles Kettering, right? Yes.
He and all the barn gang worked for Charles
Yes.
Kettering. He had a gasoline engine mounted on a block
Mm-hmm.
with two lines going into it. One of them ordinary gasoline, and one of them with tetraethyl lead.
Okay.
And he fired this thing up for me to show me, and it was about ready to knock itself off the block.
In other words, it was shaking.
It was shaking.
I got you.
So he switched petcocks and shut off the ordinary gas and fed in the tetraethyl lead gas.
Yes.
The only problem was, of course, they didn't realize that would have so much pollution.
Exactly. Now, Charles Kettering often gets credit for doing the unleaded gas, but it was really one of his employees, correct?
Yeah, Tom Midgley.
Tom Midgley that actually developed it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, excellent. Anything else that you remember about Charles Kettering?
Well,
Any other question?
How about Colonel Deeds and Charles?
Well, first off, how your dad was the cashier?
well, that was at
Charles
that
Kettering.
was downtown.
Yeah, then
When
he came.
the General Motors bought it
Yeah,
and moved it to the old Wright airplane building down at Moraine. That's when Kettering took my dad down there as his private secretary.
so your dad was private secretary to Charles S.
At
Kettering.
that time.
Uh-huh. And what did that entail for him as being private secretary to Charles Kettering?
Well, everything a secretary does.
About anything, right? Yeah. Do you remember going to work or seeing Charles Kettering, going to work with your dad or anything?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Any remembrances of Charles Kettering from those younger days?
Well, he had a hand in everything.
Was he kind of inquisitive, would ask a lot of questions, or
Very much so.
want to know what each person was doing, and how did that work?
He would assign jobs for him.
Okay. I see. So he kept his finger on
Everything.
everything.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, very good.
So when was this, when your dad became private secretary to him?
I'm purely guessing, but I was probably about 10 or 12.
You're about 10 or 12 years old. Now see, was it around 10 or 12 years old when he developed the steering wheel, which became Inland? What happened? Where did Inland come in? Inland Manufacturing.
It came in after Kettering had the self-starter.
Okay.
It was after that. But he started these other things at Inland.
Okay. You had a story about Colonel Deeds, right? And the flying, maybe a little bit. Can we think of that briefly?
Colonel Dees wasn't colonel at that time.
Okay. And how did you remember how he got his name at Colonel?
During World War I, Dees was taken to Washington and made a colonel to handle the aircraft side of production.
Okay.
In fact, he called Arthur Morgan, because he knew that Arthur Morgan had surveyed the whole valley, and asked him to designate an area that would be suitable for a larger field than McCook Field. McCook at that time was just in the bend of the Great Miami River downtown. In fact, it was pretty small. It had written across the top of the hangars, "This field is small, use it all."
I've heard that, yes.
When he called, he asked Orville Wright where he would recommend a place for a larger airfield. And Orville felt that Huffman Prairie, where they had been doing their practicing with the airplane, that would be a good spot for it. And so the Iowa Conservancy District bought up all that property and offered it to the government for a field.
Wow.
And eventually that became Patterson Field,
Right.
and Wright Field was alongside of it.
Yes.
And eventually that all became known as Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Excellent. Let's go back for just a second. Arthur Morgan was in charge of the Miami Conservancy building the dams after the flood,
Yes,
correct?
right,
Yes.
right.
And so actually the link we've made there is Orville Wright had some input into where Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is today. Would that
That's
be
right.
correct?
That's right.
That's a very nice link that
Yeah.
we're not always aware of, I think. Yeah, good story, good story. How about the Engineers Club? Do you have any remembrances back in there that you'd like to share with us?
I can tell you about it a little bit. You'll see it on that video.
It seemed like almost everyone who was involved in Dayton and inventing and manufacturing was a member of the Engineers Club, so you probably knew a lot of important people there.
Well, there were just 100 members got the Engineers Club started, but by the end of the first year there were over 200 already.
Okay.
But it was started in an old private home. I've forgotten the name of the streets where it was located. Not too far from where the original Delco building was.
Okay. On the east end of town, I assume
Yeah.
you're thinking. Okay.
But it was a private home
Mm-hmm.
that was started in 1914. And, no, 1912, I guess it was. Because in 1914, Kettering and Dees decided they needed a new building. And that's when they started building the present Engineers Club building.
Okay.
It was finished in 1918. And it's exactly the way it is right now. Except that if you walk into that building from the front
Yeah.
and turn to the right, at that time, the big room at the right was a billiard table, a billiard room. There were pool tables, 3 pool tables and 2 billiard tables. In fact, some of my buddies, when I was working at Delco, we would rush over there at noon, grab a bite to eat in the dining room, and then go up and play billiards for 20 minutes.
That sounds good.
And some of the older boys,
Yes.
older men, had they used the pool tables, and woe betide anybody trying to take those pool tables from those guys. But we could play billiards. so we did.
Would there be a little wagers on the games at all, or?
I can't answer that.
Don't know that. Good call. Good question. Good answer. Now, about how old were you then? Do you remember about what year that would have been when you joined the Engineers Club?
I joined the engineers September the 8th, 1937.
1937. So that would have been Orville Wright lived until 1948.
Yeah.
So did you ever run across Orville Wright in the Engineers Club?
Oh, quite frequently, but I wasn't in on very much of their close stuff.
I see. Did you ever have any discussions with Orville Wright or even say hi to him in the club?
Yeah, I'd say hi to him pretty
Yeah.
early.
Okay. And do you, anything that you remember about his personality, or was he friendly
he was
or
a little
open?
bit, he wasn't a great forward guy.
Understand, yeah.
He wanted to stay in the background.
But if you spoke with him, he was more than happy
yeah,
and
yeah.
friendly?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Anything else that you remember about your dealings at the Engineers Club and those famous group of people that belonged to that?
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Charles Kettering or
John Patterson.
Patterson, any of those people?
Well, at the request of the John Botch, head of the present Warren Gang, I wrote up my 70 years in the Engineers Club.
Wow, very nice.
And, in fact, I can get a copy of that. I may have a copy in my briefcase. I'll have
Okay.
to check it, but I think I do.
Okay. So the Engineers Club was a social club, but also
It
what
was
else?
a place to bring students
Okay,
and to get them started in engineering.
okay.
In fact, I was on the Engineers Club Foundation when we decided to build that building alongside the present building.
Mhm.
And I had a couple meetings with students in that building when the Board of Governors decided to sell it to the Wright State Medical Department.
Okay.
And most of us down there think that was a mistake.
Mm.
But it's serving a good purpose now.
Mm-hmm. Well, Charles, go ahead.
I was gonna, when did the barn gang start?
The second one, the new one?
No, the first one.
Oh, the first one. About 1910.
1910. Now, so that wasn't part of the Engineers Club, the original barn gang.
No.
That was a bunch of guys that worked for Charles
Lots of guys
Kettering.
that worked in Cox's barn,
Okay,
which at that time was on Central Avenue.
okay.
You said Cox. You mean Cox or Deeds? Deeds Barn?
Cox.
Cox owned that first.
Really?
The Cox, yeah.
But yeah, not the Engineers Club. They met in Cox's barn
Barn, yeah.
on Central Avenue.
Oh, on Central. Okay.
Yeah, and of course, we know that Cox was the guy who, newspaper,
Yes.
governor, and all that other
Yes.
Yeah.
jazz around. Now, that was the first barn gang.
Yeah.
How many guys were in the first barn gang?
There were about 9.
9.
Yeah.
Can you name them?
No, I can't.
But now you say the second barn gang. Now,
That I helped start in 1992.
okay.
And
That's
what
the present barn gang.
and what was that about, and how did that work?
Well,
Who
that
was involved? Just to honor people?
Wilson
or-
Charbonneau and Chuck Dempsey and one other person whose name doesn't come to mind right now, and I started that second barn gang.
Okay. Which you named the Barn Gang. Why did you name it the Barn Gang?
Just a throwback to the original.
Okay. Okay. Good. And these were a group of people from the Engineers Club, right? Okay. Charles, can you think of anything else that we've forgotten that you would like to add today? And anyone else?
Tell about your flight on that 1921? Wright airplane out
I
at
showed you that picture.
Yeah.
Well, Dad had arranged with Howard Reinhardt, who at that time was vice president of the Wright Company, and he was also a good pilot. Dad had arranged for him to take Lois and myself up for an airplane ride on the west yard of Colonel D's home on the Spruce Road. And they put Lois and me in the car and the plane.
Okay.
As Howard started the airplane down the grass, Lois got scared and opened the door and jumped out and ran back to my dad. Howard said, close the door. He closed the door, took me up for a ride.
Oh, wow. And about how old were you at that time? I think your paper said 1921 on there.
Somewhere around
Yeah.
there.
And
So
what?
you'd been 18 years old.
Yeah. What?
No,
what,
8 years old.
Oh,
8 years old.
about 10.
what year were you born, Charles?
1912.
1912.
So
okay.
been about 9
Yeah.
years old.
All right.
About 9 years old. Well, now, this was an enclosed
What?
cockpit.
The first enclosed airplane in Dayton.
Now, this was which?
The first enclosed airplane in Dayton.
So you rode on the first enclosed airplane in
Yeah.
Dayton,
Yeah, that's what I have a picture of it.
1921.
Yeah,
And that was called the Wright Airplane Company at that time.
yes.
But Orville would have sold the company
No, he hadn't sold it yet. Oh, yes, he had. I'm sorry.
around 1915.
Yeah, 1950.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, well, we have Daniel Schlegel, lead interpreter for Carillon Historical Park, joining us today too. And we have talked about the flood and Charles's adventures in the flood. We've also talked about Charles Kettering. We talked a little bit about Colonel Deeds and about the Engineers Club. So, if you have anything that you'd like to add,
No, I'm not sure you've covered everything.
it's okay. You can. It can be edited, not a problem. So, if you have anything burning that you'd like to discuss with Charles, it's all good.
Wonderful. I'm trying to think.
Or anyone else too to add.
Was there any other stories that he's told that you can think of? Get about this stuff.
That picture's in there.
Well, tell the story about the table with the peanuts.
Well, when Dad closed up the house, when water was starting to come down the street already, he put the piano up on some chairs, and he closed all the windows and doors so there'd be no current in the house. There's a dish of peanuts sitting on this table. That floated straight up and trapped the ceiling, the dish against the ceiling, floated right back down. When Dad went in through all the mud to start cleaning things up, he ate the peanuts.
No. Did you have a bird too? I was reading in your book that.
There was a canary. Dad heard it singing when he was closing the doors and windows.
Yeah.
He took it up to the second floor, and it survived.
The bird survived too.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So, do you have any flying stories that you remember from early days of flying? Just the one trip that you made on that 1921 flight?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
How was that flight? Was it a good flight or
Oh, yeah, it
a
was
rough
a good
flight
flight.
or?
no, he just went up and circled around Delco Dell, which was on a little promontory overlooking the Shots and Southern Boulevard.
Okay.
But also at that time, this promontory up there above Shots and the farm had cottages in it, and that's where the Delco people spent their summer times. In fact, we kids would enjoy listening to all our parents playing and dancing around.
You told us earlier about your relationship with Charles Kettering, being that your dad worked for him, right?
Yeah.
How about the Delco, the name Delco, and you also worked for Delco, correct?
I worked for Delco as a co-op, and then after I graduated, I worked full-time there.
Tell us about your education before you go into that Delco.
What?
Tell us about your education. You were educated as a,
Well, Lois and I went to Steele High School. August Firsty, Professor Firsty, we called him. taught science. And he called me aside one day and said, I think on the basis of what I see you're doing here, that you should go to the University of Cincinnati and the Department of Electrical Engineering. And which I did, and I got an electrical engineering degree.
Now, tell about what you did, your position in World War II with Delco. You were at Delco in World War II, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell about what you did. Your
Well, at the start of the war, I had a commission as a first lieutenant in a anti-aircraft group. And I was all packed, ready to go. We were ordered to India to protect the over-the-hump route. I was packed all ready to go, and the day I was to leave, I received 2 letters, one from Detroit and one from Washington. Both of them instructed me to resign my commission and stay at Delco to work on their welding problems. They were making landing struts for aircraft and generators for the Navy.
Mm.
And both of those required certification by the Army. And I had that certification, and it was my job to run my process engineering department from 8 to 3 in the afternoon, and from 3 to 8 I would have to go around to our subcontractors and check their welder certification and the parts they were making for us to go into these government parts during the war. And then from about 10 till 2, because that's the only time we could use the welding machines, they were in production the rest of the day. But from about 10 till 2, I was training arc welding operators to use these machines. For instance, we had the B-26 required a special alloy for its flange and axle, and it required more than heat than we could get out of a regular welding rod. So we used what we call atomic hydrogen, which was simply bringing 2 electrodes together with an arc between them in an atmosphere of hydrogen. And it was extremely hot. We had to air cool our helmets. But you would use that just like an ordinary torch. I've forgotten, I should remember, but I don't, the actual material that was used for those.
Charles, do you remember some of the first jobs you had when you started with Delco? What were they working on then?
Well, I was on the drafting board drawing multiple machines.
Okay.
And Bill Felstein, our master mechanic, came out one morning and said, since you're the only electrical in the department, you're going to have to take the place of this guy who left without telling us and moved to Florida, moved to California. So I took over the welding then. It was resistance welding at that time, spot welders, seam welders. But I did that then until I got involved in this stuff in the war.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Now, this was when General Motors had taken over Delco.
Huh?
This was when General Motors, after General Motors had taken over Delco.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Now, what you know Charles Kettering's son, Eugene, right?
Yeah.
You knew him real well, right?
Oh.
What did he do? What did he do?
Not too well.
Oh, what did he do? Was he working with Delco, or what did Eugene do?
To tell you the truth, I don't remember.
Okay.
He started electromotive in Chicago.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions for Charles today?
What did you do after Delco?
After Delco,
Yeah.
well, our shop superintendent was approached by Byron Foy, who was the president of Jack and Heights in Cleveland. Bill Jack and Ralph Heights. Bill Jack was just a good guy, and Ralph Heights was an engineer, and they needed some help. So they came to Grieber Stupp, who was our superintendent, and asked him to go up there. And Grieber asked 3 of us to go up there with him. That's how I got to Cleveland. But their board of directors would not do anything to promote the company, so eventually it died out. That's when I got into the welding industry on my own.
The other claim to fame in the welding industry is those bumpers that give on your car. How'd you get involved in that?
Well, they asked me to figure out how to weld them, how to join them, and we flash butt welded them together.
Say that one more time.
We flash butt welded them. That's when
That's
you
what I
bring
thought
2
you said.
pieces together, establish an arc,
Okay.
and then when it's properly warmed, hot, you slam them together.
Okay.
Do you consider yourself an inventor?
What?
Do you consider yourself an inventor?
Oh, I wouldn't say so.
But an engineer.
I did get involved in a lot of stuff.
Sure
In
did.
fact, I do have a patent.
What is that patent on?
You're familiar when they built the wire things to put in cement roadways, highways?
Yes, rebar or
Yeah.
yes, reinforced.
Well, eventually those things weren't wide enough to cover the roadway, so they had to overlap them. They would build them full size, but they had to bend it in the middle. And I've got a patent on the hinge to do that.
All right, very good. All right.
Did
Charles?
you write for that yourself?
But
Did you write for the patent yourself, or did someone help you with that?
fortunately, I had a lawyer do that.
I think that's what the Wright brothers decided they needed to do
Yeah.
too.
When we visited, when our barn gang, the present barn gang visited Springfield, we had a talk by the patent attorney in Springfield who took care of that for the Wright brothers.
Nice. Anyone else have any questions? Or Charles, do you have anything else you'd like to share with us today?
I think that's enough.
I agree. You did a great job. We sure appreciate it. We've enjoyed talking with you. Your stories are truly fascinating. Thanks so